Connecticut al mundo.
Estás escuchando.
Transmite en su canal de frecuencia modulada estereofónica multiplex La Voz Radio, desde New Haven, Connecticut, al mundo.
Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. My name is Caprice Taylor Méndez. Es un placer estar aquí con ustedes. Mi nombre es Caprice. Aquí con Juntos Podemos, Together We Can. Thank you so much, William, for that applause. Mil gracias, William, nuestro productor querido aquí con Juntos Podemos, donde celebramos co-creadores de un mundo más gentil y más justo. And what a pleasure to have William as our awesome producer of the show, where we celebrate co-creators of a kinder and more just world. And today we have a New Haven grown doctor that will work with us on a topic that is so central to what is happening in our society and also at a personal level. Y vamos a hablar hoy sobre un tópico con una doctora que es experta sobre este tema de terapia restaurativa y justicia restaurativa. Y la doctora Kyisha Velasquez creció aquí en New Haven. Bienvenida, doctora Kyisha.
Muchas gracias. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, what a pleasure. Y como siempre saben, este programa es bilingüe en inglés y en español. Entonces, cuando escuchen el otro idioma, por favor, no cambien esta sintonización porque tenemos buenísima información, especialmente con todo lo que está ocurriendo a nivel de nuestra sociedad, nuestro vecindario y también a un nivel personal. And so, Dr. Kyisha Velasquez, welcome. What a pleasure to have you here, homegrown here in New Haven. And I met you maybe like 10 years ago now or so, doing community-based restorative justice work. And you've decided to become a doctor, focusing on making accessible trauma-informed therapy to the community in English and Spanish, and making it affordable. Today, our topic will be about restorative justice along with restorative therapy. It hits a personal note. When I was about 15, I almost got shot next door to where I was growing up at a friend's house. And of course, I didn't even realize I was carrying trauma until for the first time I got the opportunity to visit family in Guatemala since I had left when I was a toddler. And at the age of 18, my godmother aunt at 4 a.m, the first morning that I woke up in my grandparents' house, decided to have fireworks for me. I could have sworn they were machine guns or bullets flying, and I threw myself on the floor. And after, I don't know how long I was on the floor, really scared, I realized, oh my God, out the window I see beautiful rainbow colors. They're not guns, they're fireworks. And it took me probably a whole day to clear through that trauma that came back, resurfaced. After 3 years, I didn't put mind to it. I survived. I felt blessed. But I had this trauma that all of a sudden just came up. And it was such a beautiful moment, not having been able to see my godmother since I was 5, not having been able to see my grandparents. It was my first morning waking up in the countryside in Guatemala. And I was shocked that that trauma came up, even in the most sweetest, blessed moments of my life. And recently, there was a car that crashed through my backyard. I live in a corner home here in New Haven, and I thought, I need to build up, put trees, put rocks in the front of the yard, trying to prevent any vehicle from coming through if they lose control on a corner house. But a vehicle came in through the backyard, and it was planned. There was a getaway car pulling away really fast as soon as the person who crashed the car into our yard jumped out of the vehicle based on our video camera and let the car keep running towards the house. And so lucky, my brother and his wife gave us an outdoor dining table, and the wheels got stuck of the car in that dining table iron legs and saved the house. No one got hurt. But the force of that vehicle taking down 3 trees and a wheelbarrow and going over 10 pots of soil, it would have taken some big part of the house as well. And restorative justice, that peace of mind, and had anyone gotten hurt, it's thousands of dollars of repair right now that I can't afford. Restorative justice, people confuse it and say it's giving people the green light to do as they wish.
Right.
But it is rather, I really do believe hurt people.
Right.
And somehow that the cycle of hurt and pain must end. Punitive justice isn't working, where we just punish people again. No real therapy available for the harm that many people carry from childhood, that the trauma from harm that was done onto them. And over 90% of the women who are incarcerated in Connecticut had shared that they experienced some form of sexual trauma as well. Over 90%.
Or domestic violence.
Right. And there's a strong correlation with those who are incarcerated and the pain and harm that they have faced in their lives. And so what is restorative justice? Is it justice at all? Does it even have the nerve to be able to call it justice, right? And I've wanted to talk about this topic because at a social level, we're looking at defunding. We're pushing to defund the police being present in our children's public schools, and taking those resources and supporting reducing the pain and the harm and the trauma that children have, understanding that there is a correlation with behavioral problems in school expressed in the classroom or amongst student and teacher relationship or student to student relationship, and disruption in the classroom with something needs to change. And instead of being punitive, let's get to the root cause and also have justice. So I'm not throwing out the justice piece, but I'm going to stay quiet and let you take over. Que hoy en día yo misma tuve un incidente a nivel personal que llegó un carro y de una vez chocó contra el cerco de la casa y casi chocó con la casa, destruyendo todo en su camino. Y la persona que chocó el auto fue a propósito, porque pudimos ver por video de que saltaron el cerco y se fueron en otro carro que los estaban esperando y salieron del auto corriendo. el carro hubiera seguido en su camino de destrucción hacia la casa si no fuera por una mesa con patas de hierro que paró el auto, y esto fue recién. Y yo quisiera que agarrían el culpable, yo quisiera que lo podían arrestar, pero justicia restaurativa es muy diferente de justicia punitiva. Y de ahí yo quisiera que los quienes estaban involucrados podían encontrar terapia, podían encontrar otra forma de hacer lo que estaban haciendo. Si era por dinero, encontrar oportunidades de rendimiento para conseguir otro trabajo, lo que sea. Pero hoy vamos a hablar sobre este tema de justicia restaurativa, porque es comprobado, muchos quienes cometen crimen tienen necesidades, inclusive si es ellos mismos sufrieron en las manos de otra persona. Por ejemplo, 90% de las mujeres encarceladas aquí en Connecticut fueron víctimas directas de crímenes, inclusive abuso sexual o violencia doméstica. Y sus vidas tomó el camino de ser encarceladas. Y lo mismo para los hombres, pero los estudios no han sido tan fuertes como de parte para el beneficio de mujeres. Pero más y más también los hombres nosotros estamos poniendo más atención que también los hombres fueron abusados, por ejemplo, la mayoría desde niñez. Y hoy tenemos con nosotros la doctora Kyisha Velasquez, que va a dar más sabiduría sobre este tema, no solamente como más de una década o más trabajando directamente con nuestra comunidad aquí en New Haven, comunidad vulnerable, nuestra comunidad latina, jóvenes, nuestra comunidad de afroamericanos, y también la verdad es en situaciones difíciles económicas y falta de recursos, y ella decidió ser una terapista para aumentar el recurso contra el trauma aquí en New Haven. Entonces es un gran placer estar aquí contigo, doctora Kyisha Velasquez. Mil gracias por estar aquí presente. Acabas de escribir un libro y es sobre el tema de trauma. Y estás escribiendo varios libros sobre el tema de trauma. Y el tema de trauma es bien complicado. ¿Nos puedes explicar cuáles son los varios libros, la serie de libros que estás creando para la comunidad, y cómo es que uno puede recibir una copia de estos libros tan importantes? Y le vamos a recordar a los quienes están escuchando sobre estos libros durante el tiempo que estamos aquí juntos. And so, Dr. Kyisha Velasquez, understanding trauma is very complex. You've written a book focused on trauma, and then you're also in the midst of a series of books in regards to navigating trauma. So, what are the topics of these various books? And if you could also shed light around restorative therapy focused on trauma.
Okay. So you said a lot. So I want to cover everything that you talked about. I wrote notes. The difference between criminal justice and restorative justice is what I'm going to say. The current criminal justice system is punitive. It's you commit an offense that they deem as a criminal behavior, and you have criminal charges, and then you're punished. So the problem with that is so punitive, and there is no rehabilitation for the offender or the person who committed the offense, and there's no restoration for the victim. So in the case that with the car crashing into your house, really, if those individuals get arrested, they're going to get punished in the criminal justice system. They're going to get probation or jail time. They're going to put some type of reimbursement for you, but when you get it, it all depends on the individual's access to money and if they're incarcerated for the crime, because if they have previous criminal record, there's so many different levels that are obstacles for victims really getting restoration. So sometimes it feels like victims get re-victimized by the criminal justice system. So it doesn't work for anybody, for the offender, for the victim, or for the system, because they end up spending a lot of money, time, and effort in each case.
And this comes from also your professional work
Right.
with Juvenile Review Board, looking at various cases, legal cases, criminal justice cases, and also trying to seed in New Haven an alternative to the punitive justice system for youth.
Well, originally, even before that, I worked for Project More and the Alternative Incarceration Program, AIC programs. Then I worked for the Juvenile Review Board in New Haven, and we expanded to Hamden. So the uniqueness is that the AIC programs were alternative programs trying to get individuals who were charged with criminal behavior to do alternative programs to prove that they shouldn't be put in jail, basically, get a second chance. So that AIC program also does that, and they still exist throughout the state of Connecticut. And then Juvenile Review Board was a different alternative because it was right a step before. I think what was more powerful was it's a step before they go to court. So they don't even have to engage in court at all. It's their one chance to be able to restore back to the victim whatever they damaged. So what is restorative justice? It is including all parties to figure out what is the best consequence, not punishment. Because for everything that you do in life, whether it's considered a criminal act or a negative act that is harmful to someone, you have to have a consequence. So that's what restorative justice is. But it's directly the person being accountable to the victim and the community to, one, restore back to the victim what they damaged, and number two, restore back to the community so they don't reoffend and become a productive community member and resident. So it's kind of like in-house taking care of things. So there are consequences. They still have to. So in that case, which are the car crashing, the way restorative justice could handle that is they would have.
Can you hold that thought?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I'm going to translate, and then that's perfect entry point back into English. Que la doctora Kyisha quiere hacer la distinción en el sistema de justicia criminal que existe hoy en día y la diferencia con justicia restaurativa. Y la justicia criminal que existe por la mayor parte hoy en día es punitiva, y la justicia restaurativa pone en el centro la prioridad de justicia restaurativa es la víctima o víctimo y ayuda a la persona que sufrió daños a identificar, a definir con la persona que hizo el crimen cuáles van a ser las consecuencias de haber hecho ese daño contra la víctima. Es decir, muy diferente del sistema judicial que existe hoy en día para crímenes, que muchas veces le cuesta más tiempo, dinero y labor emocional para la víctima, y la terapia, Justicia Restaurativa apoya directamente a la sanación de la víctima, más cómo prevenir a que la persona que causó daño, que repita causando daños a la comunidad. También la persona que causó daño tiene que restaurar el balance, la armonía comunitario también. Entonces se involucra restauración de unas relaciones más saludables con la comunidad y también con la víctima. Y también existen consecuencias. Hay consecuencias del acto de la persona que cometió el crimen. Entonces, es importante reconocer que justicia restaurativa también tiene consecuencias. Thank you, Kyisha.
You're welcome. So I was going to explain about, in that particular case, how would restorative justice work with the car crashing into your house? Well, there would be some type of mechanism. Restorative justice can be delivered in many ways. A juvenile review board, which is considered a reparation board, is only one way. There can be also restorative conferencing that's done. And in that particular case that we're talking about for your car crashing, I think restorative conferencing would be the best way. And basically, it would be like a meeting in person where you and whoever you want to be there as with you would sit around a circle or a table, depending on the setup. And the person who crashed the car would be there, and there would be somebody facilitating, and then there would be somebody representing the community. And it would be an open discussion about what happened. And there's actual format, there's specific questions, but the bottom line is this: we would get to hear from you as the victim what was the damage and how it made you feel, what happened, and then what would you want to happen. What do you need from the offender? And then the community would speak, because the community's role is a little different. The community would say, how did it affect them as a community, but also what role do they play in helping to restore? Because it is not solely the offender's responsibility, it's the community too. Because in order, for instance, for them to be able to restore the harm they did to you as a victim, they would need to probably make money. So something in the community has to support that, right? A business or whatever, or volunteering, community service work, or something. So community has to be at the table, and that's the role they play. And so both the community and the offender would restore back to you as the victim. And then the offender gets an opportunity to talk about why they did what they did and take ownership. Not admit they were wrong, but even deeper than admitting they were wrong. Because in the court system, criminal justice system, it's about admitting wrongdoing. But in restorative justice, it's about taking ownership of your actions and your behavior. And then what can you do to restore and repair the harm that was done? And that's what it's really about. It's really unique. And in the end, then after everyone speaks, there will be an agreement created that everybody would feel comfortable with, that the offender is going to do, and then everybody's role in it and how long, and then you would sign it, and then it would be wrote out. The important thing about this is that everybody learns a lesson, everybody's voice is heard, and there's a sense of community being reignited. Because I think what happens now is criminal acts are done in silos, and even though it affects the community, they're not involved. So it only is between the victim and the offender, and it unfortunately creates this normalization of harm and repetitive patterns that continue. And you're right when you said earlier, hurt people, but hurt people also hurt themselves. And I think that's when we think of offenders, that's how, when we think about rehabilitation and stopping people from reoffending, the real way to do it is to help them take ownership of their actions, restore the harm done to victims, and restore to themselves. And we forget that part of it, you know. Yeah, I know that's a lot.
No, that's beautiful. And so I will translate this. La doctora Kyisha Velasquez está no solamente como terapista dando información sobre qué es justicia restaurativa, pero también porque ella trabajaba por más de una década apoyando a la comunidad aquí en New Haven en implementar un sistema nuevo sobre justicia que es más restaurativa y menos punitivo. Y inclusive trabajó directamente con jóvenes aquí en New Haven que cometieron crímenes y notaron de que muchos de ellos también tenían trauma. Y de ahí, en lugar de encarcelarlos, crear un sistema donde ellos pueden pagar los daños de una manera diferente y también restaurar la fe de la víctima, también sintiéndose parte de la comunidad, teniendo una buena relación con la comunidad. En el caso del auto chocando mi cerco de la casa, Kyisha Velasquez dijo de que lo que pasaría es muy diferente de un sistema criminal punitivo judicial. Para justicia restaurativa, nos sentaríamos en un círculo para que nos podamos ver muy bien. ¿Y quiénes son? A la persona, a la víctima, en este caso sería mi persona y mi compañero, más la persona que cometió el crimen, más un representante de la comunidad, y también la víctima tiene la oportunidad de tener a alguien que lo apoya durante estas conversaciones. Y de ahí yo soy la primera que tendría la oportunidad de contar lo que pasó, los daños hechos por la persona que cometió el crimen y cómo me hizo sentir. Y de ahí, qué es lo que yo necesito para reparación. Y de ahí la comunidad, el representante de la comunidad puede hablar y ellos el rol de ellos es asistiendo en restaurar buena relación con la comunidad, con la víctima. Y, por ejemplo, pueden ofrecer tiempo voluntario o hasta recaudar fondos de parte de la comunidad. Y de ahí el ofensor, la persona que ofendió, la persona que cometió el crimen, tiene la oportunidad de no solamente decir mi culpa, pero tomar responsabilidad en todo sentido de sus acciones y comportamiento y reparar el daño. Y el sistema punitivo judicial esperan que uno diga que tiene culpa y ahí paró la cosa y tal vez se van a prisión, encarcelamiento, pero en este caso es también cambiar el comportamiento y reparar directamente los daños hechos y de allí llegar a un acuerdo que todos los partidos están de acuerdo y firmarlo diciendo, deletreando entre cuánto tiempo hay que implementar este plan, este acuerdo. Y de ahí empieza la sanación. Y ya vamos a regresar después de esta breve pausa más con Kyisha Velasquez. Y para mí, el rol de la comunidad ha sido tan importante en mi sentido de seguridad aquí en mi casa cuando lo que pasó con el auto. My sense of safety actually increased as a result of the community having a role after the car came crashing through the fence. And so we'll talk more back with Dr. Kyisha Velasquez after this brief commercial break, so do not turn that dial. Remember, this show is bilingual. We'll be right back.
La gente nos cuenta por qué se puso la vacuna.
Me puse la vacuna porque quiero protegerme de esta horrible enfermedad y proteger también a mi familia.
Para regresar al trabajo tranquilamente.
Tengo amigos y familiares que se han muerto y sin miedo hay que ponerse la vacuna.
La vacuna es la solución porque nos da esperanza para volver a juntarnos en familia y no contagiar a nadie.
Connecticut, vacúnate. Visita ct.gov/COVID vaccine.
La luna provocará más inundaciones en Estados Unidos en la década de 2030. ¿Por qué? Te lo contamos en Tu Mundo Verde. Según la NASA, en poco más de una década se producirá un dramático aumento de las inundaciones por las mareas altas. El aumento comenzará a mediados de la década de 2030, cuando un ciclo lunar amplifique la subida del nivel del mar causada por la crisis climática. En ese momento, el ciclo está en la mitad que amplifica las mareas, lo que significa que las mareas altas son más altas y las más bajas más bajas. Sin embargo, en la mayoría de las costas de Estados Unidos, en ese momento el nivel del mar no ha subido tanto como para que las mareas altas superen regularmente los umbrales de inundación. Pero no será así la próxima vez que esté en esa fase del ciclo, a mediados de la década de 2030, cuando el aumento del nivel del mar sea más pronunciado. Este fenómeno se debe a la combinación de un tambaleo en la órbita de la Luna con el aumento del nivel del mar. El tambaleo no es nuevo, se informó por primera vez de su existencia en 1728. Sin embargo, ahora preocupa en el marco del avance del mar sobre las costas producto de la crisis climática. Marisabel Houston, CNN, Atlanta.
WNHH 103.5, la voz hispana de Connecticut.
Buenas tardes. We're here with Dr. Kyisha Velasquez talking about restorative justice and restorative therapy. Aquí tenemos la doctora Kyisha Velasquez, que también es escritora, autora de varios libros y tiene una página por el internet que pueden buscar sus libros que por el momento están en el proceso de traducción, pero ya pronto van a poder conseguir sus libros por su página web. Dr. Kyisha Velasquez is actually a practicing therapist, so taking in new patients as well. But I know that she is coveted and probably has her hands full, but has taken time to write what I call, actually, it's part of the book overview, a guide, nice and thin, as you see, very nice and thin, a quick read, along with some very easy, relatable action steps that one can take as one is navigating different forms of trauma. One form of trauma is grief and loss. And grief and loss can show up in so many ways. The grief and loss of one's own identity as a result of traumatic events, the grief and loss of a loved one, as many of us have unfortunately experienced in this time of COVID. and so many people also became unemployed, and that is grief and loss around identity for many. It hits the core. So grief and loss guide, easy to read, and it's one that you would pick up and go back to, because it has some really insightful activities, so to speak, or reflections, that it isn't just sit and read it once and put it away. It's like a guide. So, Dr. Kyisha, thank you for making our self care more affordable, as well as finding support. What is your website where folks can go?
My website is kvtrainingandconsultation.com. KV is my initials, Kyisha Velasquez, trainingandconsultation.com.
Para encontrar más información sobre la doctora Kyisha Velasquez, pueden entrar a la página internet www.que de Kyisha, V de victorioso, que KV Training and Consultation, entrenamiento y consulta, training, TRAINING, and AND, CONSULTATION.com. Pueden entrar a nuestra página de Facebook con la voz radiotv.com y también, esa es la página del web y página de Facebook, La Voz Hispana de Connecticut, para repasar el programa de hoy. Si no pudieron anotar la dirección de la página de web, si quisieran hacer una cita con la doctora, encontrar más publicaciones de la doctora, y en este momento están todavía en el proceso de lanzar la página en español. Si no lo encuentran ahorita mismo en su idioma natal, no se preocupen. La doctora Kyisha está trabajando en la traducción de toda la información y ya 2 libros en español. ¿Cómo cuánto cuesta uno de estos libros? About how much are one of these books? Beautiful guides, very thin, easy to read.
So $14.99 on paperback, or if it's Amazon Kindle, it's $9.99.
And they can find it right on your website.
Yes, right on the top, there's a link.
And so the more we know, the more tools we have to navigate these waters of trauma that sneak up on us. Sometimes we're carrying things that we don't even know, as in the case that I shared earlier at my grandparents'. And the role of community is so new. That's so different from the punitive justice system. As you said, holding space, someone representing the community, and the way my neighbors held space. When the car came crashing through, my partner thought it was fireworks. I thought it was the neighbor's trash cans falling. And a neighbor across the street thought that it was, what do they say? Oh, thunder, a flash of thunder and light and sound. And the neighbor that lived the closest, that was home that day, came ringing the doorbell and said something strange just happened in your yard. And they stood by me the whole time. The police came. They were witnesses to what they saw, describing the getaway car. They checked in on me right after. How are you holding up? How's the fence situation going? Is there anything we can do? At minimum, they just moved this month into that house. Can we exchange cell phone numbers? And all of those steps that they took made me feel that this is my home. And I live near and in a community that they care about me. And the person that just did what they did, oof, they must have a lot of issues. But the rest of the world isn't that way. So it actually upped my faith in humanity. And to live in this world filled with humans and lacking faith in humanity, ooh, that's a tough world to live in. So the community restorative piece, as you described it, Dr. Kyisha, is so important, so important. Que la doctora Kyisha dijo de que también es importante anotar que la comunidad tiene un papel bien importante sobre justicia restaurativa y apoya en el sentido de vivir en una comunidad saludable. En el caso cuando el auto chocó contra el cerco de la casa y casi chocó con la casa, mis vecinos salieron, me apoyaron, chequearon para ver si yo estaba bien después, días después del incidente. Estuvieron presentes a mi lado cuando llegó la policía, reportando lo que vivieron y me asistieron en renovar mi sentido de que el mundo no es tan difícil. Hay buenísimas personas en este mundo y donde yo decidí que sea mi hogar, mi casa, estoy alrededor de personas buenas y teniendo ese representante de la comunidad me renovó mi fe en la humanidad. En ese instante no dio chance a que ese trauma se meta dudando de la humanidad. Entonces, doctora Kyisha Velasquez, ahora me voy a callar para que nos siga brindando su sabiduría. And so,
I want to mention two things. I want to mention why the offender ran away and how restorative justice can help to change that mentality. Because the system and the society we live in is so punitive that people think I can't come forward. Maybe it was a bad decision. Maybe it was whatever reason behind why they did what they did. They can't come forward, right? Because they feel like they're going to get the worst punishment. What restorative justice does is that it provides an avenue for them to explain why they did what they did, not take away the harm done, but give them an opportunity to explain and then give them an opportunity to fix it and repair the harm. Because what happens is, if that piece is missing, if offenders do not take ownership of their behavior and their actions, they're going to reoffend. It's more likely they're going to reoffend, and recidivism rates are going to increase. And other community members are going to be harmed. Somebody else is going to be a victim in the future. So it's a way to really stop the continuation of harm, but also let the offender know, okay, you did this was wrong, you can fix it, before it becomes something bigger. I mean, it was big enough. I mean, you have thousands of dollars of damage and nervousness that you get from it.
Not feeling safe standing in the backyard.
I'm going to be very honest with you. You know, it's going to be a while before you can actually do things in your backyard and not hear cars go by and not have that startle response, right? So it's a new trauma for you, which also can trigger and bring forth the old trauma, believe it or not, because it still lingers, even though you processed it. It hasn't gone away completely because there's a healing process that needs to happen. But that's another reason why the offender has to come forward and be a part of the process of restoring the harm. Take ownership and not do it again.
La doctora Kyisha Velasquez dice que es bien importante reconocer que la persona que causó el daño, el delincuente, muchas veces se huyen de las autoridades, no enfrentan a la víctima diciendo yo hice algo incorrecto, perdón, porque también el sistema judicial es muy punitivo en casos de crímenes y con la situación de justicia restaurativa es una manera más saludable donde le da la oportunidad a la persona que cometió también el daño para explicar por qué lo hizo. No decir yo no lo hice o tener ese debate, es decir, voy a explicar por qué lo hice y cómo lo hice. ¿qué es lo que yo hice? Y para explicarse, pero también arreglar, sanar, reparar de los daños que ellos hicieron. Y también es bien importante tomar en cuenta que eso disminuye otros casos en el futuro donde ellos repiten el mismo paterno, ellos repiten haciendo el mismo crimen o causan el mismo daño a otros vecinos. Es una manera de parar a que se repita en nuestra comunidad y es importante tratar de parar a que se repite porque en este momento estamos también observando el crimen de propiedad de casa, de carros, está aumentando en New Haven. Tenemos que saber por qué lo están haciendo, por qué están repitiendo este crimen y también conseguir alternativas a que ya no causan este daño. Thank you, Dr. Kyisha.
Thank you. The other thing I want to talk about is the school system. And I know we don't have a lot of time left, but so you talked about defunding police from the school system and how restorative justice can be an alternative instead of police presence in schools. Right now, with police presence in schools or school resource officers, and this has been I've been doing this work for about 15 years, 20 years, and the reality is that with police presence, the probability of arrest is higher. And unfortunately, what happens is normal children, adolescent behaviors are criminalized. An argument is a breach of peace. A fight is an assault. Now, if we think back to when we were young, we argued, we fought with family, with friends in school. It's not okay, and it teaches nothing to these kids if they get arrested and go to the juvenile justice system and have a record. Because there is no restoration back to the school community, which is a community that is harmed continuously by these behaviors and by inappropriate consequences occurring or punishment. So we also know that developmentally, kids and adolescents, their brains are not fully developed. Therefore, a lot of their behaviors are impulsive. So it creates a direct, as we've heard throughout the years, a school to prison pipeline, basically. And what happens is that, again, with restorative justice, you help the individual take accountability for their actions, restore the harm to the victim, themselves, and the community, in this particular case, the school community, and then they stop from reoffending, stop from continuing that negative pattern of behavior or action or whatever they're doing. A lot of arrests, if you look at any data from school systems, are fights. And when we think about why kids fight, it's normal to have disagreements and to have arguments and to have conflict. But through restorative justice, you can teach more conflict resolution, conflict management to kids so they don't repeat the same behaviors with future conflict. Because guess what? You're still going to have conflict in life. When you get older, when you're an adult, conflict doesn't go away. Things happen in life. So if you don't teach these young people during that first stage of when they have conflict, that it's not about conflict, criminal behavior, punishment, but instead it's conflict, manage it correctly, and restore the harm you've caused to the victim, the school community, yourself. If you don't teach them that early on, they're going to continue the behavior. And a fight can turn into something worse in the future. So there's a way to use it as a preventative tool, is my point, restorative justice in the school system. And I believe that, so I know public safety is an issue for schools, but they have security officers that are fully trained. And I think that they need to be used more instead of police officers.
Ujú. Excellent. La doctora Kyisha, con el poco tiempo que tenemos, quisiera también hablar sobre el tema de el sistema escolar y la diferencia de justicia restaurativa y justicia punitiva. Con justicia restaurativa, am, puede ver ah, puede uno parar a que se repita al mismo comportamiento detrás de un estudiante, pero es importante reconocer de que el cerebro del adolescente todavía se está desarrollando y a ese nivel de desarrollo del cerebro y las hormonas de adolescentes todavía son impulsivos los niños. Los niños son impulsivos y es natural tener conflicto con otro ser humano cuando uno todavía está desarrollándose. Y de allí, en el pasado, antes de la existencia de policías en las escuelas públicas, un niño o grupo de niños o dos empiezan a pelear, tienen una pelea física ahora con el sistema judicial, el sistema de justicia criminal, son criminales. Esa pelea ya es un asalto. Y de ahí se están discutiendo fuerte con palabras. Eso ya no es un discuto nomás. Es ahora un quebrantamiento de la paz, que es también una razón por la cual encarcelan a la gente. Es decir, ya las consecuencias son bien punitivas y bien fuertes contra los jóvenes en las escuelas. Mientras justicia restaurativa da la oportunidad a enseñar al joven otra manera de manejar conflictos. Si ellos no aprenden de jóvenes cómo manejar conflictos, más allá en sus vidas, no solamente personal, pero también en sociedad, se van a complicar. Y si ocurre un incidente donde hay que restaurar del daño, justicia restaurativa aprenda esa oportunidad. Y también es importante en poder prevenir a que situaciones así siguen ocurriendo. Thank you so much for those very important points. Helping us understand the difference between restorative justice and the putative existing criminal justice system, and that restorative justice is not the green light to go do whatever you want, but it's a deeper way of healing and undoing the harm that was caused and the harm that the person it's trying to stop it from being repeated. Can you say a little bit more about restorative therapy? Que es importante también, la doctora Kyisha Velasquez dijo de que sí, una persona que fue dañada, alguien le causó dolor o le golpeó de una manera física, emocional, psíquica, también es más fácil que ellos también le causa daño a otra persona. Pero es importante reconocer que también se está causando daño a sí mismo. Y hay una terapia que se llama terapia restaurativa. Doctora Kyisha, ¿nos puedes explicar en unos 2 minutitos un poco más sobre terapia restaurativa?
Yeah, so I started using restorative therapy because I believe in restorative justice philosophy so much, and I saw how healing it was, the process. So I created trauma-focused restorative therapy in order to help people really heal when they're victims of traumatic experiences. And it's about it's 2 parts, 2 stages. First stage is identifying and recognizing the anxiety and depression that was caused by your trauma, and then learning how to manage it. So coping strategies, healthy coping strategies. Stage 2 is processing that trauma and then healing from it. And that's restorative therapy is specifically during that second stage of processing your trauma and healing. You actually, there's procedures I used, and in the grief and loss book, it actually describes it a little, to help them face whoever harmed them without them physically being a part of it. You know, there's a substitute, or there's a way in therapy to really help them process the real harm done to them by the offender or perpetrator or whoever harmed them or caused them trauma. And it's very powerful because they get to heal and be released from that negative hold that the trauma has on you, and no longer stay victims. Instead, they're fully restored. They don't forget their trauma, because trauma is like a scar. Once you're healed, you still have a reminder and what I call leftover residue. So, you know, there's still things that will remind you, but you won't be triggered to the point where anxiety and depression is heightened.
Thank you for that. And so people can follow you at www.kvtrainingandconsultation.com.
Yes.
And your guides are also available online, $14.99. And we are so fortunate that you're going to be back with us a few weeks from now. So stay tuned with more with Dr. Kyisha Velasquez. We'll go in more around the various trauma-related themes and guidebooks in support of people, and grief and loss is already out and published and ready to be in your hands in support of the times that we are in. Mil gracias, doctora Kyisha Velasquez. Y tenemos la fortuna de tenerte de nuevo en unas semanas que vienen. Vas a estar aquí con nosotros para seguir esta conversación en cómo manejar en una manera más saludable el trauma, y ese es el tema de terapia restaurativa centrada en el trauma. Hay dos pasos de prioridad. Uno es poder identificar y reconocer el trauma, la ansiedad, y cómo uno puede de una manera saludable manejarlo, y de segundo, cómo procesar el trauma y sanar de un solo de ese trauma, inclusivo, por ejemplo, dolor y pérdida. Su libro, doctora Kyisha, va a estar en español pronto y lo pueden encontrar en su página de internet. Y reconociendo que el trauma es como una cicatriz, uno siempre lo va a tener, no se va a olvidar, pero sí pueden sanar. Mil gracias por proveer esta información tan importante a nivel personal, también como a nivel de nuestra sociedad. Restauración, justicia restaurativa a nivel de un país. Han tratado de hacer esto, por ejemplo, en Colombia y en Guatemala, pero hay mucho que aprender todavía sobre este tema para en verdad tener esto. Y aquí en este país de los Estados Unidos necesitamos este tipo de justicia restaurativa. Mil gracias por escuchar todos ustedes hoy, y les doy un fuerte abrazo. Y gracias, doctora, por ser una co-creadora de un mundo más justo y más gentil. And thank you, Dr. Kyisha, for being a co-creator of a kinder and more just world.
Thank
you all for listening.